belief system itself. I thought it was not enough to work in counter-terrorism, shooting down terrorists or trying to stop a suicide bomber before they reach their target. But after 10 years of this operation, I came to realize that we were fighting a ghost because we did not deal with the belief system. And this is why, when I go publicly and say Islam is a problem, because whether if you believe that your reward is 72 virgins in the afterlife, or you believe that you are blessed by the same entity in this life, you still believe in a hypothetical God which does not exist. But this God is actually your drive in life. So this is your delusion. And in my opinion, anyone who believes in such a God have a mental issue. And they actually should be in a mental asylum. But when you have 2 billion people like this, it becomes a majority, and it becomes the agreeable. It becomes a certain truth, even though it's just a projection of human ego.
Brace yourselves for a mind-bending journey as Douglas Murray joins forces with Mossab Hassan Youssef, the reformed Hamas militant turned Israel's Green Prince. In this explosive dialogue, they rip open the festering wound of the Israel-Gaza conflict, exposing the raw, ugly truth beneath decades of propaganda. From Hamas's evolution into a genocidal machine to the West's dangerous complacency, no topic is off limits. Prepare to have your preconceptions shattered as these two fearless voices challenge the world to wake up to the insidious threat of radical Islam.
We never left a trace. Never. It was impossible for Hamas to have any evidence of my involvement with Israeli intelligence. It was impossible even for the Mossad.
Mossab Hassan Youssef has lived an extraordinary life. Born in Ramallah, Mossab spent his youth involved in Hamas. That was expected of him, given that his father, Hassan Youssef, is one of the founders of the Islamist movement. Growing up, Mossab embraced Hamas and was arrested by Israeli authorities multiple times for crimes like throwing stones at Israeli settlers and purchasing guns. But during a stint in Israeli prison in the late 90s, at age 18, something changed, or maybe the better way of putting it is that he flipped. Mossab Hassan Youssef became an Israeli informant. And eventually, he became Israel's most valuable intelligence asset, foiling suicide bombings and other terrorist attacks. Israel called him the Green Prince. Mossab chronicled his life as an undercover agent in the book Son of Hamas, which served as the basis for a documentary film called The Green Prince. I recommend it. Mossab has since been outspoken not just about Hamas, but about radical Islamic terrorism more broadly, saying, "There is an Islamic problem, and I think humanity needs to stand against the danger." In 2008, he announced his conversion to Christianity, shortly before being granted asylum in the United States. For a while, Mossab went quiet. He stopped doing press conferences and seemed to be living a quiet life in California, away from the media and the death threats. But after Hamas's massacre on October 7th, Mossab felt like he had to speak out again against the terrorist group he knows all too well. Since then, he's been publicly supportive of Israel's war to remove Hamas from power. Free Press columnist Douglas Murray sat down with Mossab in Tel Aviv.
Mossab Hassan Youssef's life embodies a shocking transformation. Born into Hamas, destined to continue its legacy, fate twisted this zeal into defiance. He metamorphosed into Israel's prized informant, the Green Prince, foiling terror plots with information extracted through covert mastery. Disavowing extremism, Mossab exposes radical Islam's peril, advocating for global awareness. Will his tale awaken us to the sinister deceit lurking within ideological fanaticism?
Mossab Hassan Youssef, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
There is so much that we need to discuss, but let's start, just for anyone who doesn't know you. Where did you grow up?
Not far from here, just up the mountain in Ramallah town. And as you know, my father is one of the founders of Hamas. He's the top Hamas leader in the West Bank. He speaks on behalf of Hamas. And This was the environment where I grew up.
What was it like growing up in the Hamas family in Ramallah?
At that time, Hamas was not as dangerous as it is today. It was just the beginning of Hamas.
This is the 1980s.
1987, 88. And of course, at the beginning of Hamas, it was very hard for anyone to see October 7. And this is part of my frustration, that it started with a romantic chant, from the river to the sea back in 1987. And we had to pay the bills for the Intifada, the children of that generation. Then we grew up suffering. We saw the absurdity of the Intifada and all the con artists who took advantage of the conflict, misleading people, causing the suffering of the people. Then you see their development and how the situation got worse and worse, from the river to the sea, to stabbing, to suicide bombing, to eventually genocide. And of course, many people started the project, that this is to emancipate the people, fancy ideas.
Emancipate the Palestinian
Emancipate the Palestinian people from what's so-called occupation. To liberate the land from the occupier. All the fancy ideals of con artists who just basically want to take advantage of the suffering of the people. And this is why just going back and forth, how did that all start, and my father's enthusiasm about the Islamic Hamas project back in 1987. Did he foresee October 7, and how barbaric that attack was? Probably until now he doesn't know actually what happened on October 7 because he wasn't there. And that's a problem with this matrix of violence. So many people contribute to violence, but they don't know that they're just part of an evil force. But anyway, it was just insane, for me to grow up in that environment.
Douglas Murray aligns savagely with Mossab Youssef's stark revelations. Hamas's evolution from idealistic chants to genocidal barbarism is a chilling testament to radicalization's insidious nature. The October 7th atrocities, unimaginable in 1987, exposed the perilous trajectory of extremism. Mossab's insider perspective obliterates naive notions about Hamas motivations, revealing a ruthless machine fueled by exploitation and suffering. Who gains when children die? The land soaked in endless sorrow.
Most people think that the environment they grow up in is normal and is what everyone else is growing up in. Most people think their families are the same as every other family. Did you think that?
Of course. This is the only reality you know. And now the question, do we have the courage to fight against our conditioning, the conditioning of the society, of the parents, of our environment, and to rebel and think out of the box. But if you dare to challenge the flow of your society or the conditioning of your culture, then you better be ready to die. You better be ready to walk into the unknown.
What sort of things were you taught when you were growing up?
Jewish hatred, this is not a secret thing. Hatred towards the Jewish people, towards the infidels, towards the Christians. It's part of the Islamic common teaching.
It was just in the air.
It's in the air, it's in the book, it's in the mosque, it's in the school. And people think that it is normal to just preach hatred towards other people because they are different or because they don't agree with the Islamic principles. So wherever you go, there is hatred towards anything that was not Islamic.
And particularly against the Jews and Israel?
Mostly.
When you were growing up, and presumably you absorbed this in your family home, in the mosque, in school, and people assumed that the aim was the eradication of Israel. That was the main aim. Am I right?
Yes, this is, it's not only in Hamas charters, it's in fact a desire not only for the Palestinian Islamic movements like Hamas, Muslim Brotherhood, Islamic Jihad, Hizb al-Tahrir, Salafi jihadists. Even in the past years, we had the Islamic State in the Palestinian arena. But it's also the non-Islamic movements that praise Jewish slaughter. And this was the biggest problem that I had in the 90s during the suicide bombing attacks.
In the second Intifada.
In the second, before and after the second Intifada. And people used to celebrate.
Do we dare to challenge prejudices woven into our upbringing? Embracing blind hatred pales against the courage to transcend destructive teachings. Brainwashing runs rampant in Islamic societies, poisoning minds with genocidal hatred. Musab Hassan Youssef's brave testimony eviscerates the myth of peaceful coexistence. Can we ignore the 71% of Palestinians supporting Hamas? The truth is brutal, but ignoring it is suicidal.
So when the news came through that there had been a successful suicide bombing in Tel Aviv, it was...
At least I would say a majority of the Palestinian population celebrated, praised a suicide bombing attacks, even though it targeted civilians, mostly civilians.
And everyone knew that.
Everybody knew that. In fact, people would celebrate more when the death toll would be greater, even though we had Arabs, foreigners who died in those attacks, children, women, elders, all type of people. And this is where, from the early beginning, I had this moral conflict. How can you celebrate and enjoy the suffering of people like this? When I was under the conditioning of the rigid conditioning of Islamic Palestinian family, at the beginning you think that the Israelis deserved that. They took our land, they killed our people, they are against our God, they want to destroy us. You get to a point now when you see your enemy down, you celebrate that. But then for how long you can lie to somebody? Before they start questioning the truth and the reality.
Murray's argument obliterates moral ambiguity, spotlighting a twisted celebration of carnage. Imagine a society prizing death, a reality fiercely defied by brave souls like Musab's. Isn't humanity lost when we celebrate civilian slaughter? How can anyone justify this? Musab's gut-wrenching revelation obliterates pro-Palestinian propaganda. In the West Bank, support for Hamas has increased to 41% as of June 2024. Will reason ever conquer this madness?
Did you ever meet Jews?
Well, actually, I have memories, before the first Palestinian Intifada, I was able to come with my father to Yafo pretty much every weekend. We would enjoy the sea, enjoy the old city. There was no checkpoints. Everything was free. We were able to do it in our own cars. And we would go to the zoo. When my father get lost in the streets, doesn't know where to go, he would just ask the people, and people would help him how to navigate out of the city. It was just free. We did not have any problem. This is my early childhood memories. Also, as a child, I remember seeing Jewish people at our markets in the city of Ramallah, coming and shopping, trading. They would drive their own cars without a problem. My uncle used to work for an Israeli construction company, and his boss, his superiors, their families would come to our village, and we would dine together. This was just 1 or 2 years before the first Palestinian Intifada. When the first Palestinian Intifada started, everything changed. This is when we start to see checkpoints. This is when we start to see walls of isolation, separation of the people. It became a necessity because you don't know when the terrorist attack is going to be.
You didn't know which car was going to be an explosive device. You didn't know, yeah.
Musab reminisces about a serene past, revealing a forgotten era of coexistence. Visiting Yaffo with his father, without barriers, delighting in the open sea and markets teeming with life. Jewish and Palestinian communities interacted freely, now unimaginable. The First Intifada tragically shattered this coexistence, birthing checkpoints and towering walls. Fear birthed barriers, dread of sudden terror morphing serene streets into war zones. Why must peace be sacrificed?
Then, I mean, you had another progression in your own life where you not only had met Jews, but you'd already started to recognize the evil of what was being done. When did you move to the next step in your own life journey?
Well, from very early age, I had my problem with the culture. I did not like the abuse. I did not appreciate the beating. I did not appreciate the rigid, rough discipline. Don't expect to beat up a child, because they did not follow the religious protocol, and this child is not going to question what that was for. So, to get beaten up by the teacher, by the principal, by the parents, by the people in the street, by the imam at the mosque. Whenever, I did some adventure that went against the protocol, many people volunteered, to discipline me. So
by beating?
Violence. And, I survived it, but it was not pleasant. Many people get broken at the early beginning, but somehow, I found my strength to just fight and fight back. But in the meantime, I was in a tough position because I had to meet with the expectations of society, which basically they want you to be a jihadist, they want you to be a hero, they want you to die for the cause, to go to prison and never complain about it. So there is not one turning point of my life that changed everything. As you see, the chain of events that brought me here, and all of them are significant. But of course, witnessing Hamas brutality in prison, that opened so many questions.
When did you first see that?
1996.
And what were you in prison for?
I purchased guns with the intention of shooting Israelis. This was the culture, we were supposed to go just in that direction. Thankfully, I got arrested before I carry any terrorist attack. I was not that far.
And you were not far off carrying an attack out?
We weren't that far. We were only 18 years old. We had guns, and we were looking for targets. This is how close we got.
But as you said, you were stopped, you went into prison, and in prison you say you saw the brutality of other Hamas people to their fellow Hamas prisoners.
Hamas in prison proved to be barbaric. They killed so many people, they tortured so many people.
In the Israeli prison?
In Israeli prison, their own members, our own people, for suspicion of collaborating with Israel, with no evidence. Hamas did not have evidence. They were desperate to know who gave the information to the Israeli intelligence. So they went torturing Palestinian people, Palestinian prisoners. Dozens were killed in just a short period of time. Hundreds were tortured in the worst possible way. This was the time when I start asking the question, what if Hamas succeed in establishing a Palestinian state? Are they going to do this to our people?
Mossab's journey unearths a grim reality, exposing a rigid culture soaked in oppressive discipline and violence. From childhood beatings to street brutality, he survived an environment demanding jihadist heroics. But imprisonment in 1996 revealed Hamas's savagery. Prisoners mercilessly butchered without evidence, tortured, killed, on mere suspicion. Mossab questioned, if Hamas conquers, will Palestinians face tyranny from their own supposed liberators? What future awaits under such a rule?
You actually bridged an important river in this, which was that the thing that Hamas in prison were torturing other Palestinians on suspicion of doing, you ended up doing. How did that come about, actually working with the Israelis?
For me, it was more curiosity, that I did not trust anyone on the other side. I lost my trust and faith in that culture, in the leadership.
In the culture you'd come from?
Yes, and it's not only Hamas, because we were connected to Fatah, we were connected to other Palestinian factions. We knew the leaderships, we were familiar with their households, with their families, and how they came about. I had a problem with the society at some point. The honor killing, the child abuse, the sexual repression, the sexual violence, the many social problems that people could not actually blame Israel, but nobody wanted to take responsibility for. And it was the easy way to just blame everything on Israel and never take responsibility, and I was tired of this game. And when the Israeli intelligence actually approached me, you can say the gap between me and the what's so-called Palestinian society, which there is no such a thing because it's so diverse that they don't agree on one thing, that the gap was already huge between me and my own society. I'm not saying that the Israeli intelligence took advantage as much as actually it was very eye-opening. There was no narrative without evidence, without facts, without connection to reality that made a lot more sense.
Mossab's collaboration with Israelis stemmed from disillusionment, not betrayal. Tormented by a culture steeped in cruelty, he found the Palestinian leadership deceitful, corrupt. From honor killings to sexual violence, these deep-rooted issues were wrongfully blamed on Israel. Sick of excuses, his curiosity led him to Israeli intelligence. There, reality confronted rhetoric. Unlike hollow Palestinian leaders, the Israelis presented facts and sense, bridging Mossab's chasm with truth.
It's a pretty remarkable thing to do, to end up working for Israeli intelligence, coming from the background you came from. You don't need to go into operational details and so on, but working inside the community you did and actually informing, giving his information back to the Israelis that saved many lives, and that must have been a terrifying thing to start off doing.
In principle, to go against your own family and to take the risk to actually work together with your father's worst enemies, not knowing much about these people. It was a big risk, but I had no other choice. I just wanted to know why we were suffering, why are we still suffering? And being part of the intelligence community helped me see things for what they were, because the access that I had, you can only have if you were part of that operation.
So you'd hear about attacks that were coming up, for instance, and you could tell, presumably, your contact of what you knew was being planned. Was that an ordinary day's work for you then?
Most of our operations, the information was there already, and the agency had trouble actually piecing the puzzle. For me, it was a lot easier. If I had the information, I'm able to make the connection.
What sort of attacks did you stop happening?
Mostly during the Second Intifada, suicide bombing attacks. And what was more important, to actually find the bomb maker, because you don't want this guy to be on the loose, okay? Or the mastermind that is actually directing the bomb maker, or the person responsible for the finances, the one with the money. And those people are always changing, and they are very secretive. They are not in touch with the rest of the movement. They communicate in a very complicated manner.
In clandestine manner.
They never meet, actually, the person that they are operating, only through dead points. So the best case scenario, you would follow a suspect and you would reach a dead end somewhere in a store, behind the food cans on the shelf. This is how they are communicating. And you go into the store, they never met anybody. So anyway, these people were sophisticated. They were very hard to find. Someone like Ibrahim Hamid, it took us 8 years to find him. And when I actually detect him, it was just accidental. I saw him not far from his safe house. So...
and what was his role?
Douglas stands valiantly with Mossab, exposing the harsh realities. Imagine confronting your kin to safeguard thousands, such as the cost of standing with truth. As Mossab infiltrated, he didn't just navigate danger, he annihilated sinister schemers. How can anyone deny his bravery? Without his crucial intelligence, bloodthirsty extremists would have unleashed untold carnage. Picture clandestine bomb makers operating in shadows, caught due to unparalleled bravery.
This is the mastermind of more than 90% of the suicide bombing attacks during the Second Palestinian Intifada. So I had sometimes information about, let's say, a suicide bomber that they had the explosive built on them, and they were in a hotel room and they were supposed to reach their target within, let's say, 5 hours. We had other situations where a suicide bomber was on the loose and we didn't know where he went, and now we need to find him.
And literally with the explosive jacket on.
He had explosive built, and we need to find him. That's the only information that we have. Suicide bomber trying to get to a certain target, and good luck. One of the times he was in a car moving from Nablus to Ramallah, supposed to arrive in Ramallah, but we don't know when, and there is no schedule, there is no timetable. We don't know what car, we don't know what's his dressed. The only thing I remember, they said that he had some cab, medium built guy, just go there and wait.
That's not much of a description.
And it's still unbelievable how we were able to capture him, because we did not have information. So sometimes it was like a miracle, and sometimes it was very tense that if I don't see a suspect person, identify him and see where he's heading next, there is going to be another suicide bombing attack, another bus or school blown up within hours. So that was like how it was sometimes. Sometimes it was a little bit easier.
Was there a moment where you feared that your activities were becoming known?
You know, this is why I spent time in prison, and this is why many times we did some, we orchestrated some fake chasing, where, you know, the special forces missed me last minute, and then there was some launching missiles at my apartment. They blew up things, and I escaped miraculously. That bought us some time. We needed that time, and of course, you know, it was hot. You know, and I was involved in so many operations that not only Hamas. You know, I was in Yasser Arafat meetings, and there were like certain meetings that we needed to connect him directly to terrorist attacks. But it was a handful of people in that meeting, and the information was used by Israel against Yasser Arafat at the United Nations. So it's like how many people were in that meeting, and this is why the agency was always worried that I was on so many fronts, involved with Marwan Barghouti operation, with my father's operation, with Hamas military wing operation, the public front, some wanted people also, they came to me, suicide bombers, most wanted terrorists, and I was like literally involved in so many fronts. And this is when I remember it was Avi Dichter at that time, the head of the agency. He said, "You gotta give this guy a break. You know, if he continues like this, he's gonna be killed."
Murray and Mossab's revelations are earth-shattering. The harrowing reality of suicide bombings is blood-curdling. Mossab's hair-raising encounters, narrowly averting catastrophe, underscore the brutal nature of terrorism. His confessions reveal staggering realities, tracking suicide terrorists with zero intel, fouling uncountable terrorist attacks, emphasizes his unmatched valor. Compare that with Europe's intelligence failures, which have allowed hundreds of attacks in a decade.
And I think this was the responsibility of the agency. It's just like when I'm involved too much that it was for the time to slow down, whether send me 3 months in prison, 6 months in prison, just take me out of the region for a while. But I think I got lucky.
How long did you live that life for?
About 10 years.
10 years?
10 years. 10 years of very, very tense situation where we had to hide from everybody. But again, the cover was very good. And we did some impossible deception. The level of deception that we had to create to just erase our tracks require a bigger budget than Hollywood productions. Not exaggerating when I say this.
And when did you end up having to be extricated from this situation?
At some point, I got tired of it, and it became very dangerous. I had other reasons why it was time for me to just to leave. I honestly also got to a point where there was some, I don't want to say disagreement between me and the new leadership of the Shin Bet at that time. I like to take lots of risk, and they were just too much into the protocol, and I felt very limited. And following the protocol actually was putting my life in more danger rather than actually giving me security. We had disagreement on how we did things, and the latest intelligence I brought, it was about Hamas taking over in Gaza. I received a document coming to the West Bank from Gaza that Hamas had the capacity to overthrow the Palestinian Authority.
In the West Bank as well?
In Gaza.
In Gaza.
In Gaza.
Yeah.
And that was before the elections. Okay. So that was just an update to Hamas Shura Council in the West Bank, and same letter went to the Shura Council outside the territory, which in Qatar at that time was in Damascus.
The authority was in Qatar at that time as well?
At that time, they had a base, they had some presence in Qatar, but mostly it was Damascus. This was their main hub at that time. And I was communicating with Khalid Mash'al through a secret channel at that time.
You were communicating with Khalid Mash'al?
Yes, yeah. And he didn't know that on the other end, was the Israeli intelligence. We were that close.
What sort of thing did you communicate to Mash'al in Qatar?
Well, I was, most of the time my father was in prison. Khalid Mash'al was in touch with me. At the beginning, it was just a social thing, but then we developed that into operational. That we opened our own channel, and we give Hamas Damascus our services. We knew that they were desperate to communicate with the West Bank, and they lost many of their channels. So we came up with a creative way that they liked very much, but they had to go through us, and this is how actually we got them on the hook for a while. And Khalid Mash'al was just on the other end.
Mossab's bone-chilling revelations shatter illusions about terrorist networks. For a decade, he played a high-stakes game of deception, risking everything to infiltrate Hamas's inner circle. His unparalleled access to Khalid Mash'al exposed the group's sinister plans for Gaza. This level of intelligence gathering is beyond Hollywood's imagination. It's real-life heroism. Can we fathom the psychological toll of living a double life, constantly dancing on the knife's edge?
So the information that came, basically, that we are ready. Whenever the Shura Council decide that take over Gaza, we're ready, we have the power.
And they did.
And that was before the elections, before Hamas won in the elections. So now when Hamas won the elections, they became the government. The Palestinian Authority did not accept Hamas' victory, and this is when Hamas took over. But what really pissed me off at that time, that the Israeli intelligence knew 6 months ahead of the time, and they didn't do anything about it.
They knew that Hamas was going to take over.
That Hamas not only had the capacity to take over, but they had a plan to take over.
Mossab Hassan Youssef's revelation is a stark warning against complacency in intelligence work. Imagine knowing Hamas's plan to take Gaza 6 months before it happened and still doing nothing. Was it neglect or a deliberate choice, allowing terror to take over? Israeli intelligence had a detailed plan, but remained silent. Was this collusion, oversight, or incompetence? Can we afford to remain indifferent again?
You were extricated from the situation. You managed to start a new life outside of this region. Now, particularly after October the 7th, you've been a very prominent voice again, come back very strongly into media and public consciousness, among other things because you're somebody who has an unusually clear insight into the mindset that can do something like October the 7th. Can you explain the mindset just for anyone watching this from America or anywhere else in the West? Like, what makes somebody want to strap on a suicide vest and walk into a public place and detonate?
You know, every individual is different, and there are so many dimensions. There is a personal dimension, there is a political one, there is an ideological one. The most powerful dimension is the ideological one. A suicide bomber inspired by a God who hates the Jewish people, who hates the infidels, but in the meantime, he's a Palestinian, he's got a cause, he's living the victimhood. He's been conditioned in a climate of a propaganda that is anti-Israel, anti-West, anti-infidel, anti-anything that is non-Muslim, that is different. Then you can add to that some envy, some jealousy, whatever it is, you know, there are infinite forces that come at play that can actually cause an individual to strap up a suicide vest and end up killing himself and killing so many other innocent people that they never met before.
And of all the people you met who wanted to do this,
Murray and Mossab emphatically exposed the maelstrom of radicalization, demolishing the fantasy of harmless extremism. Their insights on October 7th's violence exposes the fact that this isn't just politics, it's ideological fanaticism, nurtured by hate towards Jewish and Western entities. A toxic cocktail of religious extremism, anti-Western propaganda, and victimhood mentality creates human weapons. Statistics don't lie. 95% of suicide attacks are linked to Islamist groups.
the belief that they were going to do this and that it was a righteous act, an act justified by God and their religion, but they also literally believe that they're going to go straight to paradise.
Of course, there has to be a reward.
You say of course, but it's not,
It's
very alien to the rest of the world, this idea.
I mean, it is, but for those who live in delusion, you know, to believe in principle, in some entity that exists somewhere in the universe, that is punishing and rewarding people based on their obedience or their disobedience. You know, one of the things in the Quran that Allah hates the Jewish people for being disobedient. Hence, many of those jihadists think that they are the sword of God on earth, that they are actually manifesting the punishment against the Jewish people for being disobedient. And this is why, you know, I personally question the belief system itself. I thought it was not enough to work in counter-terrorism, shooting down terrorists or trying to stop a suicide bomber before they reach their target. But after 10 years of this operation, I came to realize that we were fighting a ghost because we did not deal with the belief system. And this is why, you know, when I go publicly and say Islam is a problem, because whether if you believe that your reward is a 72 virgins in the afterlife, you know, or you believe that you are blessed by the same entity in this life, you still believe in a hypothetical God which does not exist. But this God is actually your drive in life. So this is your delusion. And in my opinion, anyone who believes in such a God have a mental issue, and they actually should be in a mental asylum. But when you have 2 billion people like this, it becomes a majority, and it becomes the agreeable. It becomes a certain truth, even though it's just a projection of human ego. So, as someone who lived this delusion and broke free, to be delusional is something. To be a delusional suicide bomber is something else. Everybody can have whatever dream they want to have in reality, their perception of reality, but there is a limit.
Isn't it chilling how Islamic extremism twists faith into a weapon? Murray and Mossab exposed the lethal delusion driving jihadists, a perverse belief in divine reward for massacring innocents. This toxic ideology has fueled countless atrocities, from 9/11 to ISIS's reign of terror. How can we combat such deeply ingrained fanaticism? It's not just terrorism, it's a war of ideas.
When a suicide bomber went off in this period and killed people, how did their families back in the West Bank react?
It's a very strange phenomenon, because they just lost their child. But now everybody in the society is congratulating them for their loss. They don't say, we're sorry for your loss. It's a great job. It's a great gift to the society. Congratulations. Your son is a shaheed.
A martyr.
A martyr. So now, when everybody is coming to the mother to celebrate, now the mother has 2 choices. To tell everybody to go away, and this is how she's going to lose the status in the society. Or just accept the fact that she lost her son, but she now can gain something out of it, which is the mother of a martyr.
To have the pride of
the pride and the status of a family that contributed towards society. It's why praising suicide bombers, by hypocrites in the society, that none of them would have agreed to their children to die in a suicide bombing attack.
Khalid Mashal wouldn't.
Sheikh Hassan Youssef wouldn't. None of the Hamas leaders would. So
none of them sacrificed their own sons.
Unless their sons die on their behalf, then they would say, we sacrificed our sons. But usually they want the poor people to die on their behalf. They want others to die on their behalf.
Douglas and Mossab touch upon yet another sensitive topic. Suicide bombers' families face a sickening dilemma: mourn privately and celebrate publicly, or face society's rejection. They smile amid horrific loss, trapped by societal pressures, chanting victory while vomiting grief. Palestinian society's twisted expectations force mothers to fake pride, masking anguish. Leaders exploit poor families, never sacrificing their own children. This psychological warfare perpetuates violence.
You're probably one of the very few people who would have seen what Hamas did on October the 7th, and as well as being appalled, would not have been surprised.
Honestly, I was surprised.
You were?
I was surprised. Not by Hamas brutality, by the scale of the event, because to move from door to door and just kill everything, animal, human, infant, whatever came your way, innocent people, that includes foreign workers, that includes dogs, that includes life, everything. And by a bunch of savages, filming the whole thing as they are in a big party.
The glee.
Yeah, or something, whatever it is, the terminology, it really was shocking to see.
It's in a way, it's amazing to me, because you'd seen the brutality of this movement all these years, but still October the 7th shocked you.
The scale of the attack and the documented attacks. Let's say
The fact that they wanted to record their crimes.
that everything was just streamed live or recorded
GoPro,
in time.
yeah.
There was no suicide bombing attack that I did not see the fresh photos of the scene. And I'd say could be the ugliest thing any human being could see or smell. And every time, and dozens of those suicide bombing. And it's the ugliest thing. So it's not that I was not familiar with Hamas brutality and what they were capable of creating and the destruction. But this one, you see them moving, you see them speaking, you see them enjoying it. They rejoice in the death of so many innocent, defenseless people, in people's living rooms, enjoying beverages from their kitchen, while the children are mourning the death of their parents just next door. There is no human language that can describe the evil that took place on October 7th. And that's not just a war crime. It's not just killing. It's a genocide.
Douglas Murray and Youssef's stark revelations obliterate any doubt about Hamas's savagery. The scale of October 7th's barbarity stunned even Youssef, a man intimately acquainted with Hamas's brutality. Streaming their atrocities live, these monsters reveled in slaughtering innocents. How can anyone defend such inhuman acts? This wasn't war, it was genocide. When will the world wake up to this evil?
Such a genocide, but nobody's talking about it. This is where it struck me, that actually at that time Israel did not even build its case. And I think it's a Jewish trauma that does not want to accept that actually the enemy was able to execute another genocide on our watch, and we could not stop it. And I think this is part of the guilt, that Israel is actually not telling the truth of what happened to them. That's like part of it is the shame or the guilt, and I totally understand. That sometimes you can be a victim and you prefer to actually not share it with anyone because you become vulnerable and people take advantage. And actually that could ignite the bloodlust in many others that actually enjoy the stories of killing, enjoy the stories of rape, enjoy the stories of destruction. That's actually going to encourage them to do more. Just like a beast smells blood, and the bloodlust is ignited in the beast. And I was speaking to the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations and telling him, this is a genocide, what you went through, what your country went through. We have to build the case. This is not just a terrorist attack. And it's still, until now, Israel is not making its case publicly.
Let me ask you, as we wrap up.
Youssef's insight into Israel's reluctance to fully expose Hamas's atrocities is chilling. This silence, born of trauma and fear, inadvertently shields the perpetrators. By not building a strong case for genocide, Israel risks emboldening future attacks. How many more innocent lives must be lost before the world acknowledges this horror? The beast of hatred smells blood. We must not feed its insatiable lust.
I remember speaking with you almost 10 years ago now, after a set of attacks in France, in Paris. There was the Charlie Hebdo attacks, the attack on a kosher supermarket, then the attacks when dozens of jihadists rampaged through Paris, massacred people at the Bataclan Theatre and the stadium and coffee shops. And I remember then asking you about, what does it take for the West to wake up to this reality? Because, you're aware of this reality because you grew up and you saw it firsthand, and you were a very unusual person in thinking your way out of it, which, is incredibly unusual. I would say that most Israelis today understand the reality that there's a group or groups of people who say, we want to kill you, and if they get the opportunity, they do. But the rest of the West seems to me, even all these years after we spoke about it, still is in a sleep. What would you say to Emmanuel Macron, Rishi Sunak, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris? What would you say to them to communicate to them that this is real?
Murray's insights brutally eviscerate the West's complacency. Jihadist attacks aren't isolated incidents. They're part of a relentless ideological war. Remember Paris, 2015, 130 innocent lives snuffed out. How many more must perish before we act? The enemy openly declares their murderous intent. Muslim extremists eye the West as prey. Why do we still bury our heads in the sand? Isn't our survival worth fighting for?
Contributors to terrorism and violence actually hypocrites. Because when we are hypocrites, we're not calling things for what they are. We see the Islamists' threat. We see what they're capable of doing. And when I say CIA, FBI, Homeland Security, other intelligence services in the West, most democracies in the West, they know the ideological dimension that motivates terrorists and terrorist attacks. But we prefer not to talk about it because it's Islamophobic, or because it's controversial, or we may offend the Muslims. So now we're submitting to their intimidation when we don't talk about it, when we don't challenge it, that this is not acceptable. It's not acceptable. Life depends on diversity. And the different is appreciated. Yes, we should have human discipline because we are not animals, but also we don't want someone acting as a sword of God, because then everybody would think that they have this authority, and the only outcome is bloodshed. We have the Muslims who live in the West, and I think there is no problem with that in principle, but don't enforce your religious identity, and when they do, we have to counter it. Like, for example, we cannot separate church and state and allow mosque and state to be united. We cannot just stay asleep while watching the Islamic hubs produce more extremists. And today, we have so many Islamic fanatics who actually preach through social media, through YouTube, and they are based in London, they're based in Paris, and they don't only advocate for a peaceful Islam, actually they're just preaching very dangerous, radical ideologies, the Muslim Brotherhood ideologies that is anti-West, that is anti-civilization, that is representing the 7th century mentality as an alternative to the modern world. And they are protected by the freedom of speech. But there has to be a limit to where you can preach such sick ideology. And I think most of the leaders are afraid, whether they are ignorant of the topic or they have short-term interest and they don't want to compromise this interest. They don't want to offend Muslim countries like Saudi Arabia or like Qatar. They have their own calculations, but in the meantime, we cannot hide from the challenge because Islamists are in the West and they are waiting for an angry cause. And this is the dangerous thing about the Palestine. This is why one of the reasons that I came back and I came very strong against the pro-Palestine, because it's not about Palestine. There is no such a thing as Palestine. It's anti-West, and it's looking for an angry cause. Yeah. And the more anger they are able to generate, they're creating the climate for those individuals who have been waiting to act. So I don't want to say...
Youssef fiercely condemns Western hypocrisy, exposing its perilous dance around Islamism. Intelligence agencies know the radical threat's roots, yet fear labels like Islamophobic. Why? Truth ignored is danger embraced. Radical hubs in London and Paris openly spew toxic ideologies undermining modern values, profiting from free speech. Leaders cower, prioritizing short-term gains over long-term safety. When will they confront the festering extremism instead of appeasement?
What are we waiting for? Like another major terrorist attack? Then we are going to understand that we have an enemy within. I hope we don't get to that point. But let me tell you something. From my personal experience, when they start first shouting from the river to the sea, calling for Jewish genocide, it was no time before chaos. And it became suicide bombing attacks, became stabbings, it became mass shootings, it became, everywhere became a target. And Palestine is chaos. Islam is chaos. And of course, this is very hard to say, but I hope that we don't get to the point to see the things going completely out of control, to realize that we have individuals among us that we really need to leash, that they cannot take advantage of the freedom. There is a limit. You cannot advocate on behalf of terrorists and terrorist ideology by the name of freedom of speech. It's not acceptable.
You can't use freedom in a society to shut down freedom.
Yeah, absolutely, but because it's very hard to draw the line, and many people take advantage of this. Take, for example, after 9/11, Muslims went into the hiding for almost a decade or more than this. They just hiding their identity. And after October 7, it was just next day they start demonstrating against Israel and against the West.
In New York, in London, in Paris, everywhere.
Within a week, they showed so much aggression. And again, this is the bloodlust that I told you about, which is very strange. You look 9/11 and you look October 7, and what's after? Totally different outcomes. So why all this? And this hatred against the Jews that is attracting actually many Westerners who might have something in common, that they are all anti-Semites. And this is what's bringing the Islamists and the communists and could be the socialists even to work together. They have something in common, and that is their hatred towards Israel. But what many Westerners are not understanding, that this is not only anti-Israel, it's anti-success and it's anti-civilization. It's pro-chaos. This type of individuals and this type of movements, they thrive in chaos. They don't like order. In order, they die. And this is why they want to see more of the chaos.
Mossab Hassan Youssef, thank you.
You're welcome.
Youssef's chilling warning exposes the lurking chaos within. Ignoring chants of "from the river to the sea" invites violence. Must we wait for another tragedy to recognize the internal threat? Radical ideologies abuse our freedoms, exploiting free speech to dismantle it. Post 9/11, extremists hid, only to resurface post-October 7th. Their shared hatred unites fanatics, intent on destroying order and civilization itself. Murray and Youssef's insights on Hamas and radical Islam are certainly eye-opening. What's your take on Youssef's journey from Hamas, insider to Israel's informant? Do you think his experiences offer a unique perspective on the conflict? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to hit that like button if you found this conversation enlightening, and subscribe for more hard-hitting dialogues on global issues.